So I've persuaded Kate Barlow to join me today at Creative Quilting, which is closed to the public today, to tell me a little bit more about herself. Kate and I know each other quite well, but I want to introduce her to you. We're surrounded by her lovely embroidery work. So I'm guessing you enjoy embroidery.
I do, yes. I always have done. My grandmother taught me to sew when I was very little. And I originally trained as a costume maker for theatre.
Okay.
So I've always loved making things, but embroidery was only a hobby until I kind of discovered the Royal School of Needlework and realised that they had a course to train you to be a tutor for them. So I moved from Cardiff, where I was living, and came to Hampton Court to study embroidery for 3 years at the Royal School of Needlework.
And that was how long ago?
That was in 2013.
Okay.
So yeah, quite longer than I think.
Well, I know we only
now.
think it was yesterday. That's fine. That's fine. So is some of the work here on display some of the work you had to do for them, kind of during the course?
Yes, it is. The course I did is called the Future Tutor Programme.
Right. And
it's a 3-year course where all you do is stitch for 3 years, which I know sounds delightful, but it's actually quite hard work. So over that 3 years, we do a lot of different embroidery techniques, all very traditional. The first piece that you have to stitch on the course is this one here, which is Jacobean crewel work. Right. So out of everything we do, this is probably the most traditional, I think. Certainly when I did the course. So it's all stitched with Appleton's crewel wool on a linen twill fabric, which is a very traditional materials. And it kind of has the tree of life running through it with, big blousy flowers and little creatures and kind of unrealistic colours. The scale of things and the colours don't always, they're not always true to life. That's one of the sort of joys of Jacobean embroidery, really.
So with the embroidery, the pattern is that the design is yours, but
Yes.
the stitches are the traditional bit.
The traditional bit, yes.
Yes.
The kind of motif of the tree of life is a very traditional Jacobean motif, but you can sort of interpret that in any way you want to. So okay. The sort of shape of it is mine, but it's really just a stitch sampler to kind of learn as many surface stitches as you can.
Gorgeous, I love it.
In your first piece.
And this piece is also very traditional, I think, isn't it? It's called Stumpwork?
This is a Stumpwork figure, yes. It's one of the things we do. It's a very traditional technique that would have been used on caskets, sort of in the 1600s. You would have found very often little tiny figures smaller than that. And it's used a lot with raised embroidery techniques.
Okay, yes.
Very often.
Bumblebees and that sort of
Bumblebees,
things. Yes?
Yes, all of those kinds of things. A lot of needle lace would have been used.
Okay.
So her stockings are actually made with needle lace, as is the bodice of her dress.
Wow.
She does actually have little tiny French knickers under there too,
does
just
she?
in case.
You put the glass on there so we can't check.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And we've got a modern take on this, haven't we, in the sweeties? Aren't they the same technique?
They are, yes, they are kind of stump work and raised embroidery. So the very last piece I had to stitch for the course was something called our signature piece, which was to showcase everything that you'd learnt and to sort of say how you wanted to use those skills when you graduated. So for that, I created this little dress here, which kind of drew on the costume making background that I had.
Right.
But also I wanted to cover it with tiny little raised embroidery and stump work sweets and candy, which is what all of this is. So there are wooden beads that are wrapped with silk ribbon, which is a very traditional stump work technique. There are candy canes made from cords, which is another thing that we're taught how to make. The little humbugs are canvas work. There are also the little candies in the front here, which is surface stitching, and a little beadwork band made of bugle beads around the outside to give it. So it's all really three-dimensional and not at all flat, really. So this was the kind of final piece that I stitched, and from that I wanted to create a day class, so that I could teach the techniques that I'd done. So the little frame down there with the pink and white stripy fabric, those suites that are on there are all using the same techniques as this. They are a little slightly bigger in scale to make it easier for a day class. But I've taught that a lot, and it's all really popular.
I'm not surprised. They're very nice. Non-fattening sweets.
Yes, absolutely. And they are, people don't always just put them on a frame. I've had a lady who sent me a photo. She'd stitched them into a fascinator for a wedding.
Hair, yes.
Somebody else made a pink witch's hat for Halloween and stitched them down there. All kinds of things like that. There's a little Christmassy version.
Yes, I saw that.
Just there
nice too. And tell me about Budgie.
The Budgie is, he's a technique called silk shading, which is basically thread painting or painting with a needle. We do 2 different modules on the course. We do a basic silk shading, which is always botanical. It's a flower or a vegetable or something like that. The advanced version is something with fur or feathers, normally. So I chose to do the little Budgie. He was probably the hardest thing that I did. There was tears, there was swearing, but I'm actually very proud of him in the end. So much so that I entered him into the Royal Academy of Arts summer exhibition. Just on a whim, I didn't tell anybody, and he got shortlisted and then he got chosen.
He got chosen, I remember.
He got chosen, which is quite unusual because they don't often pick textiles related pieces, particularly not something that's stitched in such a traditional way. So I was thrilled to bits with that, not just for myself, but for the fact that getting embroidery recognised as an art form and not just something that people do as a craft. It is a craft, it's a highly skilled craft, but it's not always given the recognition that other types of artwork is.
Well, I think that's very true. Well, the work in front of us is absolutely delightful. Thank you so much for coming into the studio and sharing it with us.
Thank you.
And I'm going to really look forward to some of the workshops with you, Kate. Thank you
Very much, Val. Thank you.